Hi, and welcome to Ward 13 with Grumpy, and my counterpart as a human filibuster, Jim O'Connell.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm much better than last week when
Yeah.
tendinitis knocked me out
knocked
for
you
the
out.
evening.
Well, I was happy to hold fort. I had one of those things during your show that I had to apologize to people for. My phone was going off and some things started happening, and I'm like,
I
"What?"
like stuff like that.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
makes it more interesting.
It does.
Jim.
It does. Right on the fly. So,
So
what's happening this week?
Well, you said there was something you didn't get to talk about in your show, and what was that? If we can keep it to like 5 minutes.
5 minutes. There was a lot of stuff I didn't get to talk about in my show.
Just leave out the adverbs, the adjectives, and anything to do with logic, Jim.
Yeah. So no, there were a bunch of things. I was looking at the. We don't usually deal with non-education things, but I was.
We do on this show.
We do on this show, but on my show we don't.
Yeah.
So I was delighted to see today there was a groundbreaking for a park, a new park. One of the Manchester is a pretty good city in terms of green spaces, and
It's
so
a place here, if you can throw a tent and sack out, right?
well, that's one purpose, one use for it. I mean, most of the parks. I'll tell you, the other night I got a call from somebody who said,
Ooh.
there's you got to go and see the way that we'd had a disagreement about the city and whether there were. I thought the vagrant problem, which is different. I'm separating that from homelessness, but the vagrant problem on Elm Street had improved in recent weeks.
Seems to have.
Yeah, since the additional police officers, they doubled the number of police officers there, and that's definitely had an effect. But then somebody called me and said, you got to go down to Veterans Park and look at Veterans Park. There's like a mini encampment there.
There is?
Well,
I didn't see it when I just went by.
Yeah, right opposite JW Hills. And so there was a bunch of people there last night. Not a bunch. In the end, it was like 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
But they had trolley carts with kind of tarps off of them and umbrellas and all kind of set up around the ground. So it looked like a mini little, Now the
Maybe it's that, what was it, the Occupy Wall Street
Occupy
movement.
Wall Street, yeah.
They lived there for about 6 months.
Yeah, they did. Actually. Okay, yeah, there you go. So I said, look, they were sort of saying the city's gone to hell in a handbasket, and I'm like, look, they said, drive up and down Beach Street, Elm Street, and Maple Street and see what you see. So I did. Last night I got in the car and I drove, and there wasn't a single person at that time. Now, I'm not saying that...
Now, did you use a video cam like Joe Kelly Lavassa so you can document it?
Yeah.
Or are we supposed to take you on your word?
Yeah,
An old
yeah.
type of Anglo-Saxony thing.
Yeah,
That's
see, I
old-fashioned.
don't, I've no the reason to do that, and I don't dislike these people. I don't wish them, any ill. So I'm just, was interested in this conversation around the fact that Elm Street had become demonstrably different in the last month or so, in that there were less vagrants around, and there were less people panhandling on the street corners in the last month or two as well. And I don't know why and how, but that was the case. So I did drive around.
You didn't see any public defecation, which is a particular, what do you call it, the bête noire of Joe Lavassa?
Yeah, so there isn't a lot of that going on. I'm not saying that it never happens, but look, let's be reasonable. When there's improvement, there's improvement. But we should also call it out for what it is. And we have like one of there's a lady.
Call what out for what it is?
Politics. There's a lady running for against Joyce Craig
Victoria
Sullivan, correct? And
her issues are going to be homelessness and the tax cap.
Yeah. So,
which we'll get to.
Next. Right now on the homelessness issue, I just and other things. I listened to her ward captain or captains, or whatever, the people representing her in her ward.
Ross Terrio's one in Ward 7.
Yeah, and I think
Ray
Keith
Hebert is in 10.
Yeah,
Keith in 12. But that's all I know.
And there's a guy I know well, Joe LaChance is the guy he's a former state rep. He's the former guy from Ward 1, and I talked to Joe many times, and even though we disagree politically, Joe has always said to me, "Look, I'm not a doctrinaire Republican. He's a libertarian." And he said, "I just try to do what's common sense." Well, I don't know what happened to that guy in the last few years, because he's not there anymore. Now I know he lost his seat, but Joe's been on social media and constantly now, and I just want to call this out because I don't often do this, and if I meet Joe, I want to be able to shake hands with him, but I'd be saying to Joe, So because you're now a ward captain or whatever you are for somebody running for mayor, you cannot refer to the city as anything but Afghanistan.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, when you're representing a candidate for mayor and you're on record saying you can't wait to get out of this expletive place, and that people shouldn't come here and they should go someplace else, and that Manchester's days are over. It's all that whole time. What the heck is that about? Like
it's not going to work politically.
Well, I'm just saying, but I want to call it
because
what
it's
hyperbole.
It's so hyperbolistic.
It is.
I mean, there is a problem. It's being addressed.
Yeah,
and it's not going to be perfect, and you're not going to
Right.
see it immediately.
So when I look at with all the things, I know that there's issues with schools, and the schools are the first and foremost in my mind, and I'll talk about those all day because we are not doing right by our schools. But today there was the groundbreaking on the park. It's a small thing, but it's a big thing.
Oh, the one here in Elm Street?
On the corner of Elm and Bridge.
Right.
So it's a miniature park downtown. But I'm looking at the other
I've got
efforts.
a tent. I should stake my
So, well, why
shelter
when I drove out last night after getting that call, I did drive around and I looked at all the parks that were anything to do with, like over by JFK Stadium, etc. And there was a little league game going on in one place. There were kids playing in a playground. There were people. I looked at what's the park, Bronstein Park, right opposite Central High School.
Oh yes, the one that had to be
right.
the curfew in 2015,
right.
2014,
right.
15
so
because of the spice epidemic, which everybody forgets the spice epidemic.
Right.
Even because drugs suddenly started as a problem on January 2nd, 2017, when Joyce Craig was inaugurated.
Right. So I drove by Bronstein Park last night.
Yeah.
There were probably 12 or 13 people in Bronstein Park, and they were young kids with families. There were a couple of elderly people sitting on a bench reading a newspaper or a book. At Pulaski Park, I was at Pulaski Park. There were kids playing basketball in one part. There was a guy walking his dog in another part. And I'm thinking, this looks like any nice, reasonable city anywhere with people out having fun. And when you drive down Elm Street, and I hate to be the rah
guy,
but when you drive down Elm Street last night, it was bright. It was
busy.
Jim, there were people sitting outside having their meals. So we have problems in Manchester for sure. But running for mayor in the city of Manchester,
it's because of global warming. It's unseasonably, it's like spring. Just wait till summer gets here. Oh my God, it'll be like Beirut in 1982.
Not quite Beirut. Now there's a beautiful city.
It was a beautiful
the
city.
Paris of the East, right? There's a place
we invaded it in '58.
There was a place. Yeah.
Good night, Irene.
Good night, Irene. There was a place I always wanted to visit, and I would still like to go, and that's the capital of Laos, Vientiane. And the reason,
good luck.
I know. So, and the reason for that is if you're interested in city planning and urban architecture, etc.
Oh yeah, the French.
The French built. Right. So they built Beirut on the Parisian model with wide boulevards and tree-lined streets, etc. This beautiful city, right, the mountains in the background and on the shores of the Mediterranean. Which is a beautiful place.
But then you drop a expletive deleted load of 500-pound bombs.
Well,
it kind of takes a little of the luster off.
Yeah, I was there in tougher times, but I like to think of how it was. Those were fun days, but they weren't fun at all. But a place I wanted to go is Vientiane because, and I'll go on to something else. But Vientiane, because it's been this communist-dominated country for all these years now, and has been it's landlocked, it's isolated, and so it's never been developed. And so the beautiful sort of Art Deco and older buildings in downtown Vientiane, I mean, many of them have people like living in apartments.
Like Cuba, huh? They have 1958 Chevys.
Exactly, washing hanging out the windows off these beautiful buildings, but it's all still there. It's
have Wanderlust? You're going to run away?
Well, I'll
go with you.
I'd go. I've got a whole. That with a bucket list. I have a bucket list for which is not based on things to do, but places to visit. I've been in a lot of remote places, but I've got a few left.
Well, Jim, let's get to we're going to get towards the tax cap. Tell us about the budget of Manchester. What happened?
Well,
inform the great bourgeoisie of which I'm one, because I'd have no idea what's going on because the union leader writing isn't as good as it used to be.
Yeah, it's hard to tell from the union leader what's going on,
right?
And I'm not sure that what's in the public domain.
Did we bust the tax cap?
Yes, we did.
Oh,
Yeah. So we're
gonna have to throw. We're gonna have to call Jeff Kassel. So.
Yes, we should. We should call him. So that's just tax is just this artificial artifice, which is a nonsense. It never made sense. But considering that,
how much did we bust it by?
I don't know the exact numbers. We added $2.1 million, but
it's 2.3. But what was inflation? So
inflation was 2.16 or something.
So we only went over by 0.2%,
something like that. But I don't know the exact number of that. But I got to tell you,
I'm having a heart attack.
No, but also what people should realize, and I don't mean to be patronizing because I presume lots of people do.
But we do patronizing so well, Jim.
Right. Patronizing with a capital P.
Patronization is the last refuge of John and Jim.
Yeah, there you go.
We're the first.
So the point, so we've had now year over year major large amounts of additional revenue in the city. So for a number of consecutive years now, the car registration revenues were more than $2 million north or in excess of what was budgeted and what they thought they would get. So that $2 million comes into the city. Now the ridiculous scenario in Manchester is that in booming times, and we're hiring new people at City Hall just so that we can reduce the size of the lines at which is part of the mayor's budget. We're hiring 2 new people in the clerk's office just so we
tax collector
in the where they do the car registrations and all that stuff. So just to because the lines are so long there, and we bring in this extra revenue. Yeah. The revenue is coming in, and guess what? The city of Manchester, despite the fact that we have the least well-funded school system in the state, and despite the fact that we have the largest number of kids in front of per teacher in the state, despite those two things, under this ridiculous tax cap, we can't spend the additional $2 million.
Is that you, Dr. Kassel? You have to turn off the show, Jeff.
I'm here.
You have to turn it off. We can hear ourselves talking 30 seconds late.
I see.
Okay, you can continue, Jim.
So because of this, we can't avail ourselves of the additional. We can't avail ourselves of the additional revenue. So it just doesn't make any sense. It's one.
I know that Joe Lavassa once voted for what he called a revenue cap.
Yeah.
For 1 year it was like a couple of years ago for the schools.
And then the following year he put a sign up outside his store. Some years later with John Cataldo on it because John Cataldo voted some way. So Joe can.
He only had it up for about an hour so he could take a picture of it.
Yeah. Well, I think he got.
That's Joe.
I think he got a lot of pushback. There was a lot of people not happy with that.
Joe is a provocateur.
Yeah, and he's good at it. So God bless him. That's great. But it just doesn't make any. So he did that, and he can defend himself. But this is playing fast and loose with things. Everybody knows. When I heard,
like politics.
When I heard, Dr. John Avard come out on the school board 3 or 4 meetings ago, or 3 meetings ago, and say, here's the guy who led the negotiations for teachers' contracts in the city 3 or 4 years ago,
right.
And he said that the tax cap had been damaging to the city of Manchester, that it should be eliminated. So here we have a Republican, conservative, I think. I don't know. I want to put words in his mouth. I presume he would be happy to be called those things. And here's a guy who's saying, look, this doesn't work in the city of Manchester. So it doesn't work at all.
Well, my opinion is, and it's a not as valid, I'd say, with you or Dr. Kassel, because I don't pay that many taxes. But I don't see the big problem with the tax cap because you can override it. And and this is my one point. When you don't have a state or a municipal whistleblower law or any type of transparency, you have taxation. Some people say taxation is theft. I'm really not one of them.
Yeah,
but in a place like here where money's going, and we both know where money winds up, and there's no transparency at all, I would say millions of dollars that could go to schools or something else, they just eventually get siphoned off.
Yeah, and I don't know.
But that's just my rant for now.
Yeah, and I don't know, and I don't know that.
Why is money going to a Catholic, a religious school? You don't have to say it's a Catholic school. you were the only person that even talked about that. Where's the ACLU when you need them, huh?
Right. Well,
there's no money in that.
So we had more legislation passed in Concord last week again, which is to undermine sort of local control and.
Well, let's have Jeff say a word or two. Are you still there, Dr. Kassel?
Yeah, I'm still here, and I've been listening to Jim now for it's pretty close to an hour and a half. He's got a double header.
God bless you. God bless you.
And I would say he's hitting about 90% of the time. So I'd like a few minutes to explain something to Jim that he doesn't seem to understand. The money is not endless, Jim, and in order for class sizes to go down and teachers' salaries to go up, they've got to take my money. And I don't have an oar in this water. I don't have a kid in school, and I've never had a kid in school. Now, you do have an oar in the water. You did have students in the schools, maybe you still do.
Uh-huh.
And if you're really worried about the quality of education in Manchester, why don't you move the hell out? That's what I want to know. Why don't you go to a different community? You used to live in Bedford. Why don't you go back there? Because
that's not an argument, Jeff.
And their test score results are a hell of a lot better than they are in Manchester. Ours are about the worst in the state.
So, Jeff...
why don't you just leave? This is the same advice I gave to Joe Briggs, who sat on the school board for 1 or 2 terms.
I think he's flashing back to like 20 years ago.
Too. He had 4 kids in the public school system.
Right.
And unlike you, he took my advice, and he got the hell out,
right.
And he moved to a better school system where the class sizes were smaller. Unfortunately, his kids had a little trouble adjusting.
So what happened?
School system
I didn't know that. I
was
thought
highly funded, and of course, he's paying it in taxes.
Yeah, of course.
We're taxed to death everywhere you look now.
So, can I respond?
Go ahead, Jim. Tell me why you don't move to Bedford instead of bitching every week.
No, we don't use that type of language.
You need more money to fund these schools.
Right. So I'll try to respond to the multiplicity of things.
I guess this is the old. We have the old picture of you, Jeff.
First of all, so with regard to Joe Briggs for a minute, right? So I thought Joe's kids were doing pretty well from the last I'd heard, but he did move to another place, and he was not. I was going to say the last, but he was one of a long line of people who were here in the city of Manchester who voted for budgets that did not adequately fund our schools, and then at a given time just took off to elsewhere. In the school district that Joe Briggs moved to in the state of Atlanta, first of all,
you mean he moved to Georgia?
In the state of Georgia, I'm sorry, yes,
he moved to
outside of Atlanta, yeah. And so in that school district, it's for instance, one of the differences there are state taxes in the state of Georgia, and the state funding for schools is higher than it is here in New Hampshire. Secondly, and as a result, property taxes are lower. Secondly, if you look at that exact school district, you want to be precise about, particularly about Joe Briggs, in that school district, it's a pay-to-play school district. So, yeah, if you've got the money, your kid can go and play football and hockey and all the rest of it, but it's additional to, it's not part of your, it's not supplied by the city. One other small thing, Jeff, is that, I hope your facts about and your knowledge about the tax cap and spending and ideas in Manchester are more accurate than your knowledge of where I might have lived in the past, because I have never lived in Bedford, and the only town I've ever lived in the state of New Hampshire is actually Manchester. So I don't mean that to be...
well, that's my mistake then.
Yeah.
I heard from someone that you had lived in Bedford and moved here.
No, that's
but
not true.
That really doesn't change anything.
My wife is from Bedford, and
I'm really upset about the school system. There's no reason you cannot live in another town.
Right.
And there's a reason that we have this tax cap here. And
you mean if there was crime, you wouldn't fight it? You just move?
Sorry, I missed that.
The tax cap was begun as a result of 7% and 8% tax rises in our real estate taxes under Bob Baines, who, like you, was an advocate for the school system.
Being a
and
teacher.
Actually, the entire employment system in the city of Manchester.
Right.
You have to understand this is kind of a poor city, and I'm living on a pension. I don't know about you.
Right.
But about 2.5 months of my pension go to pay my real estate taxes. I'm not particularly interested in having those taxes go up.
Right.
And this was true of most of the people that voted for the tax cap. It passed 60% to 40%, and it was an effort to curb the behavior of the aldermanic chamber and the school board from taking more and more of our money.
Okay, so let me just say...
can I just add, Atlanta, Fulton County, 8.23% increase last year in
education,
school. This the tax for schools.
So I understand what you're saying, Jeff, and I have great sympathy for the idea, that Manchester and or the state of New Hampshire, and therefore Manchester, funds its education based on property taxes is a nonsense. It's like many of the other nonsenses in the state of New Hampshire, and so that's the nub of the issue, really, right? So the state has got a constitutional obligation. If those who are constitutional purists, if you take the Constitution of New Hampshire for what it's worth, and you want to obey it, then as a policymaker, you ought to be funding the public schools in the state of New Hampshire. But of course, they don't do that. But the dirty little secret, as you may know, Jeff, is that in the state of New Hampshire, what you do is you do what you suggested. You move out and you take you do white flight, or leave out the white if you want, wealth flight, and you move to some Tony town in the district somewhere. My
sister had
and you're fine because your kids are going to get the benefits of that education. And guess what? The poor and the disenfranchised can do with substandard, sub-quality, ill-funded school system. That's the nature of the problem. I don't to respond to your question about leaving Manchester, Jeff. I don't leave Manchester because Manchester's been good to me, actually. I enjoy living in Manchester. I like the people of Manchester. I have great faith in the future of Manchester. I like a lot of what this city has to offer. And so to me, I don't want to live in some privileged, gated community somewhere outside Atlanta. I want to live with real people in a real city and try to solve some real problems. And I wouldn't be in this fight if I didn't think it was worth fighting for and that we could actually have a resolution. The real thing we should be doing is you and I, Jeff, should be on the same page, and we should be calling out Manchester politicians who go up to Concord and who vote against funding for Manchester public schools. They're the people who we should be calling out.
Well,
Jim,
Doctor,
let me interrupt you here for a minute.
Oh, I just want to add something.
The United States spends on public education.
Jeff, I just want to add something. I don't know what the national
number is.
It's my show. I want you to bring up what you told me the other day, that if you were a little younger, you'd be working for a state tax cap on education funding. Remember that?
That's right, Jim. And this is really, this whole tax cap thing it's not really a tax cap, it's a spending cap.
Right.
And I guess the politicians in Manchester can't pronounce a two-syllable word, so they go to a one-syllable word. It's a tax cap instead of a spending cap.
Right.
They're related, though. But the problem is the country, the states, the cities are going bankrupt because they are not realistically looking at the retirement obligations that must be paid for the people that are working.
Teachers'
the baby boomers are now starting to retire, and they're leaving these government jobs. And there is insufficient money to pay these pensions, and in many cases, there are health insurance obligations that the states and the cities have to pay, and the cities are actually going bankrupt. Manchester is not as bad off, say, as a city like Detroit or Vallejo, California, where the salaries are much higher. But you see, the pension system is not being properly funded. In New Hampshire, the police, the firemen, and the teachers are under a state pension system that's only about 50% funded. It's billions underfunded, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a failure to understand financial reality, and this is going on all over the country now. So yes, we put a lock around this aldermanic chamber, and we put it on the ballot, and the people, not the politicians, the people voted 60% to 40% to control the spending in this city.
Right.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
And the same thing really needs to happen at the state and especially at the federal level. The real deficit at the federal level was $1.3 $2 trillion last year. There's a false number that's reported. Everybody is lying. Social Security is in the red. Medicare is in the red. The whole federal system is actuarially unsound. So yes, we need a spending cap at the federal level, at the state level, at the city level. Because the truth of the matter is, at the city level, these aldermen are basically the proxies for the municipal unions in this town.
Okay,
can complain about the big class sizes.
Okay,
the real problem is the average teacher in Manchester is making about $50,000 a year, and the pay, if you've been in the system long enough, goes up to $78,000 a year for a 9-month job. People take these jobs, Jim, because they get 2.5 months off in the summer, and they get a week off at Christmas, and they get a week off at
Well, I have okay.
Those are a special perk.
Okay,
Jeff. All teachers do is complain,
Jeff.
complain, and you are their tool.
Jeff.
You got all the bases covered.
Jeff, we can get back to a little name calling later, but I'm on teacherpensions.org, and they rate an analysis of New Hampshire teacher retirement plan. It has an overall grade of F for providing adequate retirement benefits based on financial sustainability. Only 30.8% of New Hampshire teachers will ever qualify for a pension. So I don't know if the teachers are going to bankrupt the system. I would say not so much.
I understand where you're coming from, Jeff. I just think you need
and
to...
And remember, you are what are you a tool of now?
I know. He claims I'm a tool of the teachers or
Capitalist
union or
tool?
Something. I don't know.
The municipal unions. He's a tool of the municipal unions like Dan O'Neill, like Chris Herbert, like that entire crew, 10 of them, which crashed through the cap. It was a minor crash through the cap.
Yeah.
It was less than 1%.
Right.
Which means the cap is actually working. These people didn't even have the guts to crash through that cap in a meaningful way because they know they pay the price for it as opposed.
But that's BS in a way. Yes. No, they respected it and they got money within the parameters of it. Yet you are going off like whatever term I'd use, like a Comanche or something, is so old-fashioned from the 60s, and it'd be very politically incorrect.
It would be politically incorrect.
I think that you're cracking walnuts with your hindquarters. But we'll turn it over to the municipal union tool.
I refuse to accept that sobriquet, but I tell you, my problem, Jeff, I understand where you're coming from, and I do, and I hear the passion, etc. But my problem is that the place that you choose to point to where spending is out of control or where things need to change. It has to do with the people, the average working Joe, the average guy in the street. So the political largesse of government. At the federal and state level, people who are doing very well from the system, at the top end of the system, why don't we start with the actual, with making some changes there? You talk about a state tax cap for the state of New Hampshire for education. You probably know, because you're an educated man. Well, I'm talking about education. Yeah. That the state of New Hampshire has the least well-funded public education system of the entire United States of America. You also probably know that students graduating college from the state of New Hampshire have got the highest level of student debt of any students in all 50 of the United States of America. And that's because the state of New Hampshire funds public education as woefully as it does. And my third and final point, I have about 100, but I'm just going to make the third one right here. The fundamental to all of this, in my worldview, is that the best way, the most cost-effective way, and the greatest value for the nation is derived through education, from educating people so that they can be more productive members of society. That's how I come at it.
And I have one thing to offer before Jeff comes back on, is that 8% of teachers will break even on their pension. That mean in the state of New Hampshire. That means their contributions, what they get back.
Right.
92% will pay in more than they get.
There aren't any teachers in New Hampshire driving around in Cadillacs, or brand new or Escalades, and with homes in the Cayman Islands.
No, those are the municipal union.
And if you go to
business agents.
And if you go to the nicest restaurants, and thanks be to God, there are some really nice restaurants in Manchester nowadays.
Creamline.
But if you go to those two, if you go to the best and maybe not always best, but most expensive restaurants in Manchester, you won't find teachers sitting in there having creme brulee and filet mignon. So,
but they're easy to horsewhip.
I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah.
I just don't accept this premise. I don't accept the information. If I was teaching in the Manchester public school system, I would qualify for the top salary, which is near $80,000 a year. And at $80,000
I thought it was 78.
I can assure you, I can afford to buy a Cadillac. Now, let's assume that teacher is also married to another teacher.
Right.
And now you're talking about an income of $160,000 a year. And then being able to afford those trips to Europe for 1 month during the summer.
This is just, what is this called? Is it non sequitur?
Yeah, they could, and if they worked,
the average person in the United States is not making that kind of money, Jim.
Right.
You know what? I have teachers in my family, Jeff, and this is crap.
Solvency in the United States as a whole. If you start looking at salaries, you may have some specific statistics about New Hampshire, but I will tell you, in the United States as a whole, the country is insolvent. It's virtually bankrupt. Last year, the federal interest on the national debt was about $523 billion.
But that's not Manchester.
It's a huge number, and we're not getting anything for that number, but we have to pay that interest, or the people that buy U.S. treasuries will stop buying them, and the United States will collapse, because the prosperity that we enjoy in this country is really based on borrowed money, and that borrowed money is stealing the future from your kids.
Yes, exactly.
So
he reminds me of
your kids are going to be paying the bill.
No. What I want is the 40-some-year trajectory of the wealthiest corporations, businesses, and individuals in the United States accumulating wealth at a faster rate year over year, and so now we find ourselves that in the Western world, in the Western democracies, the United States is at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to places where the gap between the richest and the poorest is the largest. And at the same time, by the way, a different figure, but also interesting, is that the United States is now 26th, I believe, from a University of Wisconsin study that talked about social or financial mobility, and this idea that we have built for 100 years plus in the United States people came to the United States because of our meritocracy, and that it wasn't this semi-feudal Europe where it was all about who you know. Well, in actual fact, in the United States today, it is not the meritocracy that people lie to themselves when looking in the mirror and shaving in the morning. It has ceased to be that, and it is more like a kleptocracy than a meritocracy. That's the problem. And the answer should not be to fight the few bastions, the little corners of the middle class and working class left in America, where a police officer, a fireman, or a teacher can actually get a job and get some benefits and hope to have a 2-week vacation in Hampton once a year in some cottage. That should be that should be the place where you choose to make the attacks. Why not make the attacks where they justifiably should be? You've got a 40-year trajectory of wealthier people getting wealthy and wealthier and wealthier. Inheritance taxes are not in line with reality, and I agree with you 100% about the nature of the fact that the United States is profligate in its spending, and that our fiscal policies are awry. I agree with you 100%, and I do worry about the future of all our children, and they're being bankrupted. And so when President Trump comes along and introduces a tax policy supported by his followers in the Senate and last year and the year before, I agree with you 100% that is entirely against the best interests of the future of the United States.
Well, it's very clear what's going to happen, Jim. You just have to kind of, I don't want politicians running this country. I want accountants running the country.
I mean, like Trump, a businessman?
He's not a businessman.
It hasn't changed much in the last 100 years.
He's a hustler.
We still have 9-month school years. Basically the same subjects are taught. But we live in a new world now where if you want to make some money, you better know something.
Right.
You better have a skill. And after 12 years of public education, what is the average student, 12 years of public education at let's say at an average cost of $13,000 a year, we're talking about a very big investment for taxpayers.
That's more. That's
these kids qualified to do efforts.
The city of Manchester. The city of Manchester
qualified to get a job as a cashier somewhere.
The city of Manchester does not pay $13,000 a year. Yeah, so I can tell you that.
So what's the alternative? If I could just say, not educate anybody. What would you do? Put them in press gangs?
The educational model needs to change, and not only does the educational model need to change, the actual practice of teachers,
but
the whole teaching schema needs to change because
those experiments failed.
I mean, a car mechanic, and these are, a skilled car mechanic can make $80,000 or $100,000 a year if he's in business for himself.
Because there's a limited amount.
Can I?
There's a limited amount of plumbers.
Can I offer you some? Now you talk about teachers getting their pay and benefits and whatever else and where the pay scales are. Just to put something in perspective, the average income for a tradesman, a qualified tradesman, be it a plumber, a carpenter, an HVAC guy, a car mechanic, whatever he may be, the average income for a qualified tradesman in the state of New Hampshire in 2016 was $75,000 a year, and so
good money, don't you think?
I think that's good money, yeah. And I think they deserve it, and every penny. I'm not arguing with that at all. But when we introduce a teacher who's been in the district for more than 14 years and who has the highest level of qualification and degree, at the end of their career can max out at 78, there's nothing inordinate or strange or rash or illogical about that. Another thing with regard to the education, I think there are lots of issues we could talk about with education, Jeff. I think we could agree on a lot that you would be surprised about. I think that education doesn't have to look in the 21st century like it did in the 20th century. Just like we went away from the French nuns with the big habits and the chalkboards and blackboards, we also can go away from the models that we had in the 1990s. But I can see that, but also though, when I look at the quality of the young people coming out of our schools and their achievements, if you follow the cohort of people who've graduated from Manchester high schools at the top end of those schools, let it be said, in the last 5, 6, or 7 years, and you find them in amazing positions, earning excellent salaries. And they are a product of the Manchester public school systems. Where we do not do well is when we get below that top quintile or whatever it is. That there's a precipitous drop off, and we have higher than we should have dropout rates, etc. And so a job of work needs to be done. If we could lift people up. We can do it through public education, and we should be doing it through public education. You're a man of knowledge and of facts and etc. And you know, I'm sure, that any dollar spent on education of a young person in 2019 is exponentially less than money that would be spent on them otherwise later in their lives in terms of social welfare, criminal justice, and the other expenditures we might have. So. The best thing for us to do, the most economically wise thing for us to do, is to put money into education, to make sure that we're educating people and getting them ready for the jobs that will be available in the next 50 years.
Well, we're not doing that, and that's obvious. We are not preparing people for the real world. Two years of algebra is not preparing people for the real world.
Do we even teach that now?
We do.
Or calculus is not preparing people for the real world. 5% of those students that take those courses are going to be using them in their work life.
Right.
No,
I understand.
I was talking to
but
John
it's an intellectual discipline.
I said, I really screwed up. I should have just not gone to college, and I should have, contributed to Dan O'Neill's political campaign and become a fireman.
Yeah. Well,
we all shut up.
Because we have 46 firemen in this city that are making over $100,000 a year with 6 weeks of paid vacation. I mean, you guys seem to be enjoying this, but
no,
it's the cost of this is falling on the people that are working, 2 jobs, or maybe they have maybe they're working the night shift at CMC as a nurse, or as a nursing assistant.
So what do you do? Not pay anything?
The money is just not there, Jim. The money
I don't agree.
I
don't agree.
This isn't the America of 40 years ago.
No, it isn't the America of 40 years ago, because we've spent 40 years of giving tax breaks to the wealthiest and seeing that money being drained away and being put in non-productive places and being kept in trust funds for spoiled babies. That's what we've actually seen. And so that's the 40-year trajectory. Go back to things like the GI Bill. Why can't we have a decent minimum wage? Why can't we have...
The money's not there,
The money's
not there.
Absolute nonsense. The money is there. I don't agree.
The debt.
I don't agree.
All that trillions of debt went to oil wars. Jim.
So you probably know this better. I respect you, Jeff, and I think you know that, and I respect your knowledge, and I certainly respect your passion and history on these topics. And I know I have things to learn from you. But I know you must spend enough time looking at these things to know that. That the distribution of wealth in the United States is a significant problem. If we were to go back, for instance, to the taxation policies that were in place, the federal taxation policies in place when Ronald Reagan came to power, if we looked at the 1982 or the tax scheme, and if that scheme were ever, I'm not suggesting that it's the right one, but if we went back to those levels of taxation and the distribution and the way it was done at that time, we wouldn't have the financial shortfalls, the budget shortfalls we have today.
But the problem I see with your argument, Jim, is what are you going to do? Just tear the school system down? Get rid of everybody? How's that going to work? You're going to turn into Troy, New York?
No, I'm not going to tear it down.
No, I'm not talking.
Oh,
I meant Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
Excuse me, I said Jim. You're going to turn it into one of those. I lived in New York, upper state New York in the 80s, where everything was gone,
we're going to have
blown out.
Do more with less people.
And what are you going to do more?
Changed in a lot of different sectors. For example, you have a company like General Motors that has 9 times as many people retired and receiving pensions as you do people that are actually working.
Talk about now. Talk about now.
A million workers.
What do you do? Lay everybody off? Lay everybody off at General Motors so you don't have a company anymore, right? What would you do?
That's true, John. And things do fail. And our educational system is failing in this country because it's not meeting the needs of the people that are trying to be educated.
So not giving it money makes it a success?
They're relieved to have their kids out of the house for 8 or 9 hours a day, and largely these public school systems are becoming custodial services, so the parents don't have to hire somebody to watch their kids.
They had that argument when I was going to school in the 70s. That's an old argument. And by the way, I have teachers in my family, and they work pretty hard, and it's a more complex job than it was in the 70s or 80s.
What I worry about, Jeff, if you want,
and they're not that well paid.
If you do some comparisons, what I worry about is this. I do agree. That our school systems have to do better. They ought to be our major differences. I believe they ought to be better funded, and I'm open to the changes that need to be done also, but they need to be better funded. The incentive is not there to fund them better because those who have the wealth and influence and ability are able to transport themselves out of the public school system,
Jim,
and they do very nicely outside of it.
Well,
you keep talking about the money, and I'm talking about the money.
Yeah.
But tell me, do we really need to put 90% of the students through Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, especially students that have no special skill for that?
I don't think they 90% do
doing with our money.
Yeah, I don't.
Or should we put these
Hayward just had an article about
so when they get out of high school, they can actually make a living and pay these $5,000 and $6,000 tax bills that we get every year.
Right. So
they have to get the host
first of all, if you take in the city of Manchester, when you talk about algebra, you get the 8th grade in Hillside Middle School as an example.
Yeah,
right?
we had
and
algebra
we have
1 in the 8th
we
grade.
have one. There is one algebra class, right? So, or whatever upper level math class in 8th grade, and it's maxed out at it's supposed to be 24, but it actually gets to 30. Now, it's amazing that on any given year that the class just happens there happens to be exactly the right number of kids at Hillside to fill one class. Kids number 31, 32, 33, etc. Somehow are deemed not needing math. So there are years when there may be 75 kids coming out of 7th grade who ought to be allowed because they have the propensity, the capacity to do it, and the intellectual ability to do it, that they should be allowed to do high-level math. They're not allowed to do it in the city of Manchester because we won't fund the programs. Now, fair enough, there may be a year when there's only 18, but we do not have...
Where's the funding coming from, Jim? It's coming from my wallet.
No, it shouldn't be. Why is
that's growing on a tree on the west side?
No, hang on a minute.
This is money that must be extracted from the people who live in this town.
That's because.
So why have a school system?
People who live in this town are not able to pay the kind of money that is required to fund a school system, your ideal school system.
No,
then you can leave.
I'm just making one point about algebra, about calculus.
Yeah.
It's not a course for 90% of the students.
And it's not taught to 90% of the
They've got the
people.
ability to be engineers, yes. Give them that option.
Right.
But Jeff, it's not taught to 90% of the people.
Teach them how to do concrete forms. Teach them how to
concrete forms,
which will actually help them make a living when they graduate.
Listen, I don't know why you think that the only jobs available for Americans in the future are going to be, further down the pyramid. What I worry about is we live in a competitive world. The idea that we live in a transnational world. We can go with Trump and try and be protectionist if we want, but our kids are coming out of school and they're going to compete with kids from Seoul, South Korea, from Frankfurt, Germany, from Madrid, from Singapore, from Beijing, from Shanghai, from Brasilia, from Sao Paulo.
Not the plumbers, not the sheet metal workers, not the carpenters. They're not competing with Frankfurt.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
They're
Jeff,
competing in a local area, and you can't export those jobs.
Jeff, I'll tell you what you can. I'll tell you what you can do.
Have free trade, Jim.
I'll tell you what you.
I'll
tell you what.
They wanted to get rid of these high-cost labor.
I'll tell you what you can.
All right, I'm going to take over now.
Okay, Jeff, what you
down the tariffs. The American worker was no longer protected, and corporations' bottom line improved. That's why it happened.
Oh, let me.
It had nothing to do with freedom. It had nothing
Jeff,
to do with
okay,
trade.
Jeff.
It was all about the bottom line for American corporations.
Jeff, you have to behave yourself now. Jeff, so you're going to turn out 5 times as many plumbers and electricians and everything. That's not going to depress their wages?
Well, I hope it does depress their wage.
Because you need.
I actually had a plumber at my house, and he wanted $155 an hour to do the work.
Oh, so now we revealed the.
It was more abusive than the fire department and the cops and everything else.
But that's free. That's free.
So Jeff,
there's a money grab going on here.
Yeah.
It's incredible what people can make.
I'm an elderly guy. I'm 73 years old. I was unlucky enough to have a heart attack, and I ended up at CMC, and I was there for 2 days, and the bill was $121,000.
Right.
There was no more than 3 hours of work while I was there. You're mostly sitting around in a hospital, and that's $40,000 an hour.
So Jeff, why not?
There's a money grab going on
I would,
at every level. And
Jeff,
Jim O'Connell, he's got his Irish accent and everything, but he wants to grab my money too.
No, I don't.
And I'm
You
a
said,
retiree,
Jeff.
living on Social Security.
No, that's the Chris Herbert show. That's Chris Herbert, Thursday.
So, Jeff, I don't want to grab your money, and I'm not advocating for it because it seems to me
I'll grab
you
it.
don't have the money to grab in the first place. And I think I don't know, and I don't want to go into your personal details, but I'm sure if you're a property owner in the city of Manchester,
he needs
and
a good plumber.
you're a recipient of social welfare, then you're paying an inordinate amount of tax, an unfair amount of tax. Clearly, that's
we
the case.
get
I feel as though
property taxes are.
I feel as though I'm paying an unfair amount of tax on my property in Manchester. But that's the system that we have. We should be working on changing that system. When you mention about medical costs, you look at medical in the city of Manchester right now. We have a $150 million expansion going on at CMC.
We got about 3
minutes. We've got a whole new facility of whatever millions and tens and millions.
Oh, we got the new
on Wellington Road for Hitchcock, and we have the expansion of the Elliott Hospital. I remember a time in Manchester when they were talking about amalgamating the schools, or amalgamating the two hospitals because the city of Manchester couldn't afford them. Medical costs in the United States are way out of control. I agree with you 100%. But let me go back to your issue. I'm fine with. I think there's a place for tradesmen and for people, for artists, for everybody. But while you're right to suggest, I think that the idea of being a carpenter and other things are not.
It's an honorable profession.
Of course, it's on. That's not my point, though, John. That it's not competing with other people. I'll tell you what you are competing with is somebody in 1975 turns around and invents the nailing gun. And instead of having 10 guys on a roof hammering nails into wood, they've got one gun and they go ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And if you look at modern building systems, they're putting up buildings now with 1/10 the employees that they used to do in the past. And that is only going to get worse. And the United States can choose. We can choose to have our kids being like the mill kids of the 1930s and working in the mills for the man, or we can actually train them for the skills they need for the 21st century. And those skills are high-end skills. And they're going to have to. That's a level of training and thinking that they need to acquire, and our school system should be pointed at that.
Okay, Jeff, you get 2 minutes to wind up.
No, I can't compete with this filibuster from.
You get 2 minutes
from Ireland.
He's
getting all the time. I'm not getting my fair share.
You got more than your fair share.
He's a very clever guy who argues in
he's
a way
Irish.
That doesn't let the other side get a chance to.
Okay, 1.5 minutes.
The points that he's making. I'm just telling you the truth. The country's going bankrupt. The state is going bankrupt. Eventually, the cities are going bankrupt. And Jim is, of course, right. It's going to take less and less labor. But as our school enrollment goes down, the costs to maintain that school system are going up.
Yeah, because it was so underfunded.
He knows that's true. Enrollment is down maybe 15%, 20% in the last 5 years. And the cost of maintaining the same school structure is higher. This is what happened in Detroit. They kept losing students. There was migration out of the city, and they maintained the same school structure, and they tried to keep all of the employees, and it eventually bankrupted the city.
Okay,
That's
Jeff.
what happened.
Yeah, thank you for
Detroit
being on the show.
And
now, Jim, you have the rest of the time.
So thank you, Jeff, and it's always enjoyable and interesting to listen to you. We don't have time to deal with it here, but there are so many other targets for your Irish. I don't mean it like that, perhaps, but certainly your interest and passion. Detroit is like a low-hanging fruit, and Detroit is more complicated than you would assert it to be. But the fact is that the city of Manchester is a city that's growing, and things are happening here. And the biggest.
We're all out of time. Try again next week.
All right.
Is that it? Are we out of time?
Yeah, we're all out.
All right.
Okay. Let's have a long shot. We'll say bye, folks. See you next week. We're going to be talking about the impeachment of Chief Justice David Brock.
Oh, really?